Welcome to our study of Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's magic dance, the display of the self-nature of the 5 wisdom dakinis. Magic dance is one of the really great introductions to Vajrayana Buddhism that we have nowadays. And it's a text that in many ways resembles a tantra. It's a text where the line between poetry and prose is kind of beautifully sort of washed out, and also with Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's exceptional gift for communicating extremely profound matters. We have really an exceptional work here, which at the same time that it's very beautiful to read, very often leaves us wondering how to actually properly understand this. And there's 2 things to be said about that. One is we need experience. And this is a text for those who wish to engage in the Vajrayana path, those who are engaging in the Vajrayana path. And it also does require a foundation, both in terms of theory and practice. When we're speaking about the vision of seeing reality as a magic dance, this really is founded on the science of Buddhism, which is not about what we can look at externally as if there was some actual reality out there that could be objectively understood, but it's based on the insight that whatever reality we have, this is premised on the observer. And it's the difference between seeing this reality properly and not seeing it that's the dividing line between Buddhas and sentient beings. And the vision of reality, as we're presented here in the context of magic dance, seeing reality as a magic dance, understanding what we're meaning with the self-nature of the 5 wisdom dakinis. This is really understanding how our reality can be perceived more accurately in the wake of eliminating obscurations, and even without having practically eliminated obscurations, how we can assess the actual abiding reality of purity, seeing phenomena, accepting phenomena without the overlay or the projections that come with ordinary confusion, and understanding that reality exists independent of our projections, independent of our confusion. But that's where the Buddhist teaching, with its message of understanding how suffering doesn't come about due to some external imposition from some creator. It also is not inherent to a random chaotic universe in which you're just bound to suffer without much say in the matter. Going beyond these 2 extremes, the Buddha taught that the suffering that we have exists on the basis of our individual confusion. And the Buddha's point was that this is removable. And he taught a path to remove this. And so the reality that we experience in terms of our suffering is not innate to reality, but it's innate to our confusion. And so the Buddha's path is about removing confusion. It's not about ingratiating us with some external power, or perhaps reinventing ourselves, or you could say thinking of something that's nice and lovely, but rather it's about eliminating the confusion that prevents us from properly connecting with reality. And the good news that the Buddha brought to his teaching is that innately this confusion is not basic to us. Confusion is something that's additional to who we are. And the path was to eliminate this confusion that's external to us. And the general Buddhist path is very much about us working with the causes and conditions that eliminate that, and that applies to all the various Buddhist paths, both what we call the teachings of the Sutrayana as well as also the teachings of the Mantrayana. And of course, all the time there is the understanding that the condition is curable, that confusion is something that can be eliminated. The doctor has had a look at us and can diagnose our condition. It's not looking good, but at the same time, this is a curable condition, and he prescribes a course of remedy. So the Buddha, as the great physician, prescribed this course of remedy, but on the premise that the underlying condition is pure, is uncontaminated. And this is what we call Buddha nature. And this nature we unveil gradually in the general Buddhist path, but particularly in the context of the, you could say, inner Mahayana or the higher Mahayana, what we call Vajrayana or Mantrayana, we acknowledge that from the very start, the entire condition of ourselves and the world is without our subjective projection onto it as being the place of our particular confused strategies, what we call karma and kleshas. That phenomena exist independently of this. And the Vajrayana is based on the vision that innately phenomena are pure. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, and let's look at his life. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche was an exceptional teacher and very much taught within the context of the Vajrayana tradition, but always referring back to, of course, the logic of the Sutrayana. And this is what characterizes Tibetan Buddhists in general, is this unity of the gradual, and we could say rational sutra approach, together with that which takes the wisdom, which is beyond the ordinary conditional rational intellect, combining these two, the gradual path with the what we call then the resultant path, the Mantrayana. The two approaches really complement each other in that the Sutrayana enables us to work with our present existing condition of confusion, and at the same time also pointing to that which lies beyond our confusion, which is then the scope of the Vajrayana. And that's where then the Tibetan tradition really embraces the various approaches that we talk in terms of Buddhist discipline, such as the monastic discipline, the path of individual liberation, the Mahayana discipline of the Bodhisattvas, which work with a complete vision of the complete lack of inherent existence within phenomena, the complete dimension of openness, and also then within that, the understanding that enlightenment could never be about retreating into a private nirvana, but enlightenment is completely free from any retreating into a ultimate comfort zone, and hence this dedication to all sentient beings within this great understanding of openness really characterizes the vastness of the Mahayana vision and the Mahayana practice. And it's then within this that also there's the understanding of reality as it exists within this great openness, as endowed with countless qualities, which are then the qualities that are engaged within the particular Vajrayana path through countless methods that continually connect with this subtle aspect of enlightenment that exists within this understanding of openness or this understanding of emptiness, what we call then emptiness endowed with all the supreme qualities. And so Thinley Norbu Rinpoche was someone who then completely you could say understood and operated within really the core teachings of Tibetan Buddhism in general, but particularly within then the Nyingma tradition, and particularly within the tradition known as the New Treasures of Dudjom. And so specifically then, Dongsa Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, Dongsa meaning son, the child, but it means actually someone who comes from a very noble pedigree. and Se is the honorific for being born into such a family. And this refers to the fact that he was the son of Padmasambhava's representative in this age, Kyabje Dunjum Rinpoche, Jigdal Yeshe Dorje. And he was born in as his son, his elder son, in 1931, when Kyabje Dunjum Rinpoche would have been 27 years old. And Thinley Norbu Rinpoche was regarded as the rebirth, the re-embodiment of somebody called Taten Trime, a very great master. And if you read the life story of Sarah Kandro, there you can see he was an eminent teacher who also was then the teacher of Sarah Kandro. And he was at that time also the son of the previous Dudjom Rinpoche, who we call Traktun Dunjum Lingpa. So we have two rebirths in which he really served this lineage of what we call the new treasures of Dunjum. And both Kyabje Dunjum Rinpoche and Dunjum Lingpa, their lineage was to a great extent combined really as with what we then call the Dudjom Tersa, or new treasures of Dunjum. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche is also viewed as the rebirth of Longchen Rabjam, the omniscient Longchenpa. And he was very much a student of his father. And also he trained with great masters at Mindreling. And from an early age was regarded as a sublime being. And from an early age, really, someone who embraced profound understanding and yogic discipline. In the 1950s, then Thinley Norbu Rinpoche moved to Bhutan, started a family, together with his consort, Jamyang, and they had 7 children, the eldest of whom is Tsongsa Jamyang Khyentse Rinpoche. And Thinley Norbu Rinpoche taught then the new treasures of Dudjom, the Dudjom Tersa, widely in Bhutan as well as in the general Himalayan region. And then in 1976, he traveled to the US and increasingly began spending time in the West, both in Europe and in the US. And eventually he also established his residence, his seat up in Delhi, a place called Kunsang Gatzel, and stayed there for many years. He also had a residence over in Palm Desert, and he passed away there in 2011. I had the fortune to meet Thinley Norbu Rinpoche. I don't have the privilege to say I was one of his close disciples, and Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's activity was extraordinary in that he was very personal with his students. He, in addition to writing, and you could say leaving a large legacy for the rest of us, then he also had an extraordinary ability to communicate very directly, in a very magical way, really, with his close students, and achieved this both in the East and West. And also Rinpoche was known for his ability really to teach children. And I remember once visiting him and just marveling over how well the children were. The ambience and the structure and everything really allowed was so perfect for children, and in general for the particular style of teaching, which very much involved this very personal family style yogic engagement with the students. So in that way, Rinpoche really handed on so much of his legacy and empowered the students in the Western world. So we're going to be Thinley Norbu Rinpoche, he wrote some extraordinary works. I remember in the early days in Nepal, some of the early publications that came out, Gypsy Gossip, Echoes, etc. And then came Magic Dance, 1984, when I entered 3 retreats. Somebody very kindly, or a little bit after that, somebody sent a copy of Magic Dance, and it was that and Reign of Wisdoms were the only 2 Western books, English books I had in that retreat. And then also Rinpoche wrote an extraordinary book called White Sail, and also wrote other great works, Cascade of Nectar, and also Welcoming Flowers Across the Threshold of Hope, etc. So Rinpoche really, and also he left a legacy with his Tibetan writings, which actually recently is being very capably translated. And Rinpoche, both in Tibetan and English, his ability to language is extraordinary. And like I said, the sort of lines between prose and poetry is very much blurred here in Rinpoche's writing. So it's a extraordinary landscape of visionary writing, really, we have with Rinpoche's writings, particularly now then Magic Dance. So we start off with, actually in the new edition, I don't think it's in the old edition, but this homage to wisdom mind. So Rinpoche writes, I bow to my own wisdom mind, which is my best wisdom teacher, the source of all visible and invisible qualities. Sentient beings are always in time and place. If sentient beings are in time, my wisdom teacher dances magically in time. If sentient beings are in place, my wisdom teacher dances magically in place. If really examined, you never remain anywhere. You are only display. To whatever never remains, to you, my best wisdom teacher, I bow. So wisdom mind, the primordial purity of Buddha nature, which is the underlying condition of all sentient beings, is then the source of enlightenment, all qualities, both within samsara and nirvana. But sentient beings who don't recognize that, and who in their delusion construct the constructions of time and space, the awakened condition that abides within sentient beings, and also that manifests within the realms of sentient beings, is in no way inhibited or obscured. It's obscured from the point of view of sentient beings, and yet skillfully this compassionate display manifests to sentient beings however they are, however they experience time and space. And this nature is not something that we can objectify as some external savior or something concrete that conforms to our ordinary dualistic, confused mind, but it's something that exists as a natural display, the natural power of this unconditional abiding reality. So hence, to this nature, we bow down. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche begins with identifying how reality, it exists beyond the relative constructs. Reality is beyond tradition. It is emptiness. It is the 5 elements, the 5 wisdom dakinis. And across the entire Buddhist teaching, this vipassana that sees how phenomena don't have any intrinsic reality, where we sentient beings are fooled in terms of substantially grasping at a subjective consciousness, projecting solidity onto the perceived objective realm, and as such, failing to see the actual nature of reality. It's on the basis of the prajna that gradually eliminates confusion that we unveil this lack of substance. And this is where we, in the general teaching, talk about emptiness. But this emptiness pervades all aspects of reality. And we would say all phenomena that exist, they exist in terms of the unity of appearance and emptiness. As it says in the Heart Sutra, form is emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness is no other than form. That's where we understand that, and what the intention of these teachings, of what we call the prajna paramita, or the paramita vehicle, is to understand that emptiness permeates all reality. And from the point of view of this nature then always being present within a non-dual condition, it abides as the expanse of our experience. And in that expanse of our experience, there's the vision that takes us into samsara, or the lack of vision, the confusion that objectifies this dimension of our experience into an object, diminishes it according to our confusion, and as such we experience the 5 elements. And yet these 5 elements never move from their original reality. They only are perceived as 5 elements according to our confused projections. And that's where we appreciate, within the understanding that phenomena exist innately pure, which is the scope of the Vajrayana, that the result of eliminating confusion is perfectly present within the actual condition of phenomena themselves. We would say then reality, this expanse, is the expanse of the 5 wisdom dakinis. Now, this is not just something that exists for Buddhists. This is the very nature of reality. We, according to Buddhism, we call it something particular, but it of course exists universally everywhere, similarly for all beings. And so we say the universal nature of the traditions of beauty are all the nature of the 5 elements. We can appreciate how this nature permeates everywhere. So we should understand that the entire scope of the Buddhist path is about understanding that this nature is there from the start, and the path is about eliminating what obscures us from experiencing this, and the fruition is then to see what was always there. So that's what we talk about in terms of ground, path, and fruition. And then Rinpoche writes about how he began this work in what is it he says? He began this work in New York. Anyway, you should read it. Obviously, I'm not going to be able to continue to reproduce Rinpoche's beautiful poetry. And I would also, by the way, like to say, as much as some might hope that there will be sort of a digest of this, of the book, you should be very wary of I might not get it. You should be very wary of me misconstruing it. And of course, this is being filtered through an ordinary confused individual's interpretation. And I would say I'm happy to play the role of connecting you with this book, but it is about leading the horse to the water. And I sincerely hope you will read this from the point of view of connecting with Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's wisdom, and also from the point of view of this study itself, where you will be somewhat left behind and lost if you haven't actually read the text. It is very dense, and for that very reason, very often when you read this text, you could be left with some question marks, and that's where then a summary of some of the points here could very well help to clarify the confusion or question marks you might have. And that's why actually something gels. To just be served up some information where you don't really already have a hook or something that sort of relates to what's being talked about, then you're just going to have to sort of pile it up without necessarily being able to connect it with something. And that's where it's very helpful to have read before. And hence also I sent out you would have received an email where I highlight how you should read a few chapters for each session. I hope actually I can get through this. You know, we have an hour and a half to go through these 2 chapters. There's a lot of material, and Rinpoche's style is incredibly beautiful and very intense. And so there's a lot being said in there, but also for that very reason, then you owe it to yourself to really bathe, to soak yourself in this purifying nectar lake of Rinpoche's work. So, yes. So anyway, Rinpoche began this in New York, which he describes as the most crazy, lively city in the world, appearing like a splendid whirling mountain. And he finished this book in his friend's Samadhi shrine room in Paris, the most elegant paradise city in the world, appearing like a beautiful fantasy mandala. Anyway, so with that homage, and very much also you could say expressing that appreciation for the phenomenal world, then we have this homage. And I'm going to just bring forth the homage itself. Let's just see here. Yes, this is what you have in the text as the really, I think what really sets the theme of this book. So I'm going to just read this for you. 5 wisdom sisters. If we do not compliment you, you become 5 witches, making us ill and bringing us suffering. Because we cannot banish you, always our fate depends on you. 5 wisdom sisters. If we do not compliment you, you become 5 angels, making us healthy and bringing us happiness. Because we cannot separate from you, always our fate depends on you. 5 wisdom sisters, nothing can be done without depending on your mood. Farmers cannot grow their crops, politicians cannot rule their countries, engineers cannot work their machines, doctors cannot heal their patients, scientists cannot do their research, philosophers cannot make their logic, artists cannot create their art without depending on your mood. 5 wisdom sisters, nothing can be known without depending on your grace. Tibetan lamas cannot chant with cool highland habit. Indian gurus cannot sing with warm lowland habit. Japanese rojis cannot sit with dark cushion habit. Muslim sheikhs cannot dance with bright robed habit. Christian priests cannot preach with loud voiced habit. Jewish rabbis cannot pray with soft voiced habit without depending on your grace. 5 wisdom sisters, even though the most mysterious miracles cannot occur without complementing your purity. Buddha Shakyamuni cannot rest with the tranquil gaze of his lotus eyes beneath the Bodhi tree. Guru Padmasambhava cannot play magically with countless skywalking dakinis. Lord Jesus cannot walk weightlessly across the water. Prophet Moses cannot see the radiantly burning bush. Brahman Sarahapa cannot straighten arrows singing wisdom hymns with his arrow maker girl. Crazy Saint Tilopa cannot eat fish and torture Naropa. Great Yogi Milarepa cannot remain in his cave, singing and accepting hardships without complimenting your purity. You are so patient. Whoever wants to stay, if you don't exist, cannot stay. Whoever wants to go, if you don't exist, cannot go. Whoever wants to taste or touch, if you don't exist, cannot taste or touch. Whatever your actions, you are always supporting, patiently without complaining. But we ignorant beings are always ungrateful, stepping on you, calling you earth. You are so constant. Whoever wants to be purified, if you don't exist, cannot be purified. Whoever wants to quench their thirst, if you don't exist, cannot quench their thirst. Whoever wants to hear, if you don't exist, cannot hear. Whatever our actions, you are always flowing ceaselessly without complaining. But we desiring beings are always ungrateful, splashing you, calling you water. You are so clear. Whoever wants to fight, if you don't exist, cannot fight. Whoever wants to love, if you don't exist, cannot love. Whoever wants to see, if you don't exist, cannot see. Whatever your actions, you are always glowing, unobscured without complaining. But we proud beings are always ungrateful, smothering you, calling you fire. You are so light. Whoever wants to rise, if you don't exist, cannot rise. Whoever wants to move, if you don't exist, cannot move. Whoever wants to smell, if you don't exist, cannot smell. Whatever our actions, you are always moving, weightlessly, without complaining. But we, envious beings, are always ungrateful, fanning you, calling you air. You are so open. Whoever wants to exist, if you don't exist, cannot exist. Whoever doesn't want to exist, if you don't exist, cannot cease to exist. Whoever wants to know phenomena, if you don't exist, cannot know phenomena. Whatever our actions, you are always welcoming, spaciously without complaining. But we ignorant beings are always ungrateful, emptying you, calling you space. You are our undemanding slave, tirelessly serving us, from ordinary beings to sublime beings, to fulfill our worldly wishes. You are our powerful queen, seductively conquering us, from ordinary beings to sublime beings, into desirable qualities. You are our wisdom dakini, effortlessly guiding us with your magic dance, from ordinary beings to sublime beings, into desireless qualities. And so I want to introduce you. Now, this homage in itself actually invokes the presence of Rinpoche very strongly, and the language. I have actually taken the liberty to just want to sum up what really is some of the important points here, you could say, from the point of view of pointing to the view that becomes the foundation of the path, and that is where understanding this nature of reality as it manifests in terms of the 5 elements that intrinsically in their purity are the 5 wisdom sisters, when we complement, and not just in a mechanical way, but when there is the appreciation, the deep appreciation, there is then when there is the appreciation, these are our aids. These assist us. They become the basis for our success. And when we don't, when we belittle or fail to appreciate what we even in the modern world refers to as Mother Nature, then this rises against us. So we should understand this nature that we are continually situated in. Within this nature, which is the 5 wisdom sisters, all actions depends on the 5 wisdom sisters, on their mood, on your grace, on your purity. This is the nature of Earth. You are always so patient, supporting us, yet ignorantly we call you Earth. You are so constant, always flowing, yet ignorantly we call you water. You are so clear, always glowing, yet ignorantly we call you fire. You are so light, always moving, yet ignorantly we call you air. You are so open, always welcoming, yet ignorantly we call you space. You are our undemanding slave, fulfilling our wishes. You are our queen. You seduce us into desirable qualities. You guide us with your magic dance. So I want to introduce you. So understanding then how everything depends on the 5 wisdom sisters, we have this exquisite poem as the introduction. And it led me to believe, it led me to remember something Tsongtse Rinpoche recently wrote, and which is along the same lines. It's from something called The Prayer to Kali, where he exactly says the same thing. You are earth, water, fire, wind, and sky. Yet all I see is earth, water, fire, wind, and sky. For this I beg your forgiveness. You are all beings, yet all I see are ordinary beings, friends, foes, and strangers. For this I beg your forgiveness. So there's so much to be said about this, but this is also why within Vajrayana culture there is so much emphasis on the continual acknowledgement of how we, in our ignorance, we fail to properly align ourselves with the reality of things, and fail to align ourselves with the reality of what we then could call the 5 mothers, the 5 wisdom dakinis. So in this first chapter, which then is referred to as introduction, then we understand how Rinpoche explains how all phenomena doesn't means both beings that move about and also the inanimate reality. Everything that we are is based on these 5 elements. Now, all of this, and whether we see it in terms of something that is fluid or whether we've seen it something that is solid, this all comes from the innate purity of the basic ground of existence and the basic ground of all phenomena, the original ground. And that is again where we in the modern world, we suffer in terms of misunderstanding that the apparent solidified reality out there should be what constructs our experience of reality, basically what we call materialist science that attributes primacy to the material. And of course, within Buddhist science, we observe the impossibility of that in terms of all experience originating with the observer. And That's where everything that we are speaking about in the Buddhist teaching really is about the two truths that understand reality or fail to understand reality. And that's where we understand that reality arises really from this ground. And it's about knowing or not knowing this reality. So that's where we should understand whatever there manifests, this really rises within this ground or as the display. So when we don't recognize this nature, we create subject and object. We create time and space with impurity and obstruction following. So that's the condition of sentient beings. And Rinpoche explains this so beautifully. And again, this is like reading a long, really a long poem. But the point then is this difference between Buddhas and sentient beings lies in whether or not we recognize. And when we don't recognize, then imputing solidity on this dimension that we experience as our mind or consciousness, when we diminish this into a simple experience of self, then we have then this I, this subject that is seen as separate, apart from the object. And it's from within this place then that we develop what we call the 5 skandhas, or the 12 links of dependent arising, and so on, in which then we have this continual cycle of suffering, samsara. And that's where we each inhabit our own particular delusion and our relative experience of our particular world. When we recognize the purity of this manifestation that originates within the ground, then we understand this is no other than the reflection of this wisdom. Then we abide free from constructing this duality between subject and object. So it's within this then that we appreciate how all phenomena arise as a dance. Everything arises as a display. So this is where we then speak about the dance of the 5 wisdom mothers, or also in the 7-line supplication to Padmasambhava, we say, surrounded by your retinue of many dakinis. So when we misunderstand, when we are caught in this ignorant condition, misconstruing the nature of the mind, then we have this diminished or stale reality that we call samsara. And yet, however much we might be confused and obscured and veiled, then the pure essence, what we call Buddha nature, is never corrupted. It remains unstained. Now, this nature is not known by the ordinary mind. So the deluded condition, it doesn't see wisdom. And also the wisdom nature that doesn't fall into confusion is in no way entangled in the confused projections. So just like when adults might see a young child that's upset about their sandcastle being destroyed, then out of compassion, the adult will understand the child's condition, but also not be deceived. So we could say that the deluded mind is not the scope of wisdom. The adult is not sort of entangled in the child's anguished existence. But at the same time, there's the compassion for that condition. So that's where what we refer to as our experience of samsara, this is entirely something that takes place within the deluded mind. So ordinary beings, they then experience this diminished reality, what we can call ordinary relative experience. It's true, so we call it relative truth. It's true for each of us. We each have a very real experience of the world, but it's relative to who we are. So that's where the understanding of reality necessarily goes back to the observer. So that's where we talk about ordinary relative experience. And it's within this then that all the manifestations that we have, this then becomes this essentially, you could say, corruption of this purity, and the 5 elements, the 5 dakinis, then become corrupted and perceived as on the inner level in terms of our person, our body, and so forth. That's where we have the inner elements, which are then flesh, blood, heat, breath, and consciousness. That's where we can identify these within our body. And this, of course, also you see across the medicinal traditions, both in in Tibetan, Indian, and Chinese medicine. And then when we talk about the corresponding outer aspects of this confused projection with regards to reality, we talk about then the elements of earth, water, fire, air, and space. So these two dimensions, they are continually linked together. We're continually engaging in conditions that connect us between the outer and inner. So some aspects of this include then how the outer earth element is linked to the inner flesh element through eating. We eat things, stuff. The outer water element is linked to inner blood element through drinking. The outer fire element is linked to inner warmth through absorption, the fire being external sources such as the sun. The outer air element is linked to inner breath through breathing, and the outer space element is linked to inner mind through openness, our consciousness, our perceptions. So in this way, these exist within our relative experience. So as far as what happens to us when we as individuals are created, this Rinpoche explains beautifully in terms of the way that the subtle aspects of subtle air, subtle space together generate subtle fire, and then subtle fire then together with air generates water, and water and fire, they in terms generate earth. And that means really that and this particularly has to do with us, our coming together in terms of the 5 elements of our body. So Rinpoche explains this in terms of, he says, when the air element is he explains how the air element is drawn to the space element, and they engage together, and this generates warmth, which becomes the foundation for the fire element. When this fire element is drawn to the air element, they engage and move together, and this generates the water element. When the water element is drawn to the fire element and they engage and move together, this generates the earth element. So there's an increasing solidification, or what Rinpoche refers to as obstruction, increasing subtle and increasing experience of gross elements. So that's how we experience our emerging into our embodiment. Similarly, also, this takes place when we pass away. And this is also something that you can find in teachings on the bardo and what happens at the time of the bardo of death, when gradually the elements begin to dissolve. So that's where we have these instructions on how to recognize what's going on. Earth dissolves into water and the body becomes pale and inert. Water dissolves into fire and the body becomes dry. Fire dissolves into air and the body becomes cool. Air dissolves into space and the mind becomes unconscious. Mind and body then, they part as then the elements dissolve into the increasingly subtle dimension. And then again, they re-emerge. Now this is again where materialist science falls short, because the materialist science only operates with what can be tangibly measured, quantified, and known objectively. Whereas what we're speaking about here is the subtle experience that is basic to everything that we actually refer to as empirical or immediately experienced phenomena, goes through the mind. The first experiencer is this first-person subjectivity that we continually operate with. And so that is not tangible, as we know. Mind is not tangible. Of course, within the context of modern science and neuroscience and so on, there's the idea that we could possibly understand mind through observing external matter. But it's very difficult, like we often would point out, very difficult to see how that which doesn't have consciousness could be the cause of consciousness. This, of course, is a big discussion, but it is important to be quite clear on the dividing line of this. And Thinley Norbu Rinpoche himself really was someone who questioned very much how the modern person actually is subject to this discourse of science in materialist science, and how that actually is profoundly deceptive. So that's where we never ever extract ourselves from the underlying subtle causes of our being, which is then the intangible consciousness. And it's then this intangible consciousness that again, like how it's just described, re-emerges into re-embodiment on the basis of the imprints in the ground consciousness, the alaya vijnana. And that's where we say then, due to karma, then we re-emerge. So the general view that we have in the modern world is then the nihilist view, in which we would only believe in what's substantially observable and tangible. So that's where, in that, the belief is that the mind is based on the brain, and that's where then, when the brain no longer functions, and all the sort of the aspects that basically constitutes the knowledge about the mind, according to materialist science, is no longer functioning. And that's, of course, what we call neural correlation, but that's founded again on the primacy of matter. In the Buddhist context, we would talk about primacy of mind, and that the brain and other functioning organs are product of the mind, as we've just seen. But in that, the nihilists or nihilists, they only believe in gross matter. When there's no more brain function, when there's clinical death, well, that's the end of consciousness. And so death is extinction. Whereas you then have those who believe that there is a creator external to us, then the idea is then that those who have ingratiated themselves or been acted according to the injunctions and decrees of the creator, then they will be experiencing them going to heaven. They'll be united with their invisible creator. Both of these actually fall short in terms of what we could observe empirically, but again, because the eternalists, they don't base their thesis or hypothesis on what is observed, but rather on revelation and metaphysics. You can't discuss with them. And the materialists, they assume that there's nothing beyond the material, so also they're very difficult to discuss with them. The Buddhists, they observe that the subtle elements potential continually manifests within the present moment and continually is operating within all aspects of our existence. So that's why we would say that the subtle elements potential, they don't have the nature of, within the relative experience of our being, they don't have the nature of exhausting. They're just not like that. There's no cause, there's nothing that has come into existence solidly, and hence there's nothing that actually could cease. So that's why mind as such doesn't have this kind of nature that ceases. And all the aspects of experience, that operate within a dualistic context, they continue. So until there's complete awakening, when all the subtle dualistic you could say seeds of karma are exhausted, until then, then karma does continue. The patterns of karma continue. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, from the Buddhist point of view, it's a mistake to think, like the nihilists, that at the time of death, the subtle elements have vanished with the gross. According to Buddhism, when the gross elements are exhausted and their powers are diminished, they dissolve into each other, becoming more and more subtle, and will again become conspicuous and reappear as inner and outer elements in the different realms of rebirth, depending on karma. We continue to turn in this endless circle of birth and death until we realize, like Lord Buddha, the highest, the lightest, purest secret essence of enlightenment. So here we actually we have within this single paragraph really not just you could say the secret of life, but also identifying the flawed views that exist within this world in terms of the nihilists and so forth. So that's what is a very sort of prevalent belief system, of course, that dominates the cultural discourse on this matter. So that's where we need to take this quite seriously and observe ourselves. How is it that we actually exist within every given situation? And that is on the basis of this consciousness its causes and effects, and we can also identify how this is the basis for our kleshas and our karmic patterning. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, whenever the outer and inner obstructed impure substance elements exist, the pure secret essence is inherent and pervades. Among all the gross and subtle elements, we can find both impure and pure qualities. The impure are closer to the substance appearance of the elements. The pure are closer to their substanceless source. So the nature of the 5 dakinis, wisdom dakinis, is present everywhere. So these as they manifest in terms of the outer elements, earth, water, etc., and the inner elements in terms of the flesh and the blood and so forth, wherever these realities appear, the innate nature, the innate unconfused wisdom nature never is corrupted. And so on the basis of whether or not it's obscured, the degree to which it's obscured, we have pure and impure qualities. And it's on the basis of the more subtle that we have less confusion and more the substanceless, closer to the substanceless source. And the more we solidify our reality in delusion, the more the elements solidify and are solid. So that's also where we see then in the lives of great masters that have less entanglement within the solidity of appearances, that they can move freely through solid objects. So this is not just about something particularly miraculous, but it's really more about just understanding the conditions basic to our reality. All the time, then, the elements, they exist tangibly, vividly surrounding us, and we would say pure luminous yellow is the essence of the color of earth. Pure luminous white is the essence of the color of water. Pure luminous red is the essence of the color of fire. Pure luminous green is the essence of the color of air. And pure luminous blue is the essence of color of space. And this is particularly then within the Vajrayana that we celebrate the purity of appearance and appreciate their innate dimension in terms of light and in terms of the various colors or radiances of the light. Colors of the light. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, the substanceless source of the 5 manifested luminous colors is the secret substanceless wisdom energy of the 5 wisdom consorts of the 5 wisdom Buddhas. So the 5 elements, they exist inseparably from the wisdom that experiences this field. And so we talk about what is constructed in terms of the subjective as the male wisdom, or rather innately the subjective experience of mind is understood in terms of the abiding quality of the wisdom Buddhas, and the space of the expanse of the field that is perceived by that is then in confusion constructed as other, and as the object is then intrinsically the 5 wisdom consorts. So this luminous reality that we're describing here then exists in terms in the confused condition of samsara in terms of subject and object, and within the non-dual wisdom expanse then as the 5 wisdom Buddhas and the 5 consorts. So that's where we then have the symbolism that we see, for example, in Vajrayana iconography of the Yavyom, the male-female union. And that's where then the 5 consorts, they have their particular Sanskrit names, where we talk about these consorts of the 5 wisdom Buddhas as the wisdom consorts, where Buddha Lochana is the wisdom consort symbolizing earth, Mamaki is the wisdom consort symbolizing water, and Pandaravasini is the wisdom consort symbolizing fire, and Samayatara is the wisdom consort symbolizing air, and Datvishvari is the wisdom consort symbolizing space. So this is where we appreciate the innate purity that, again, as much as we might not perceive reality in terms of its purity, the abiding purity exists independently of our confused projections. And that's where we appreciate then the 5 elements in terms of their nature of being the 5 consorts. So then Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, in terms of how then we, due to our confusion, then misunderstand this nature and take rebirth in various realms as various sentient creatures that all have their own particular confused disposition that drive a particular experience. So that's where Rinpoche says, through their sense of touch, earthworms are attracted to the earth because in previous lives their habit was predominantly earth's phenomena. Through their sense of touch, fish are attracted to water because in previous lives their habit was predominantly water's phenomena. Through their keen eyesight, vultures are attracted to light because in previous lives their habit was predominantly fire's phenomena. Through their keen sense of smell, dogs are attracted to air because in previous lives their habit was predominantly air's phenomena. Through their consciousness, some practitioners are attracted to the substanceless because in previous lives their habit was predominantly space's phenomena to recognize all phenomena as substanceless magic display. So such practitioners would, in the general Buddhist context, be those that experience vipassana, but particularly then within this vipassana, the Vajrayana, that appreciates the luminous quality of phenomena as the non-dual display, then of course then this is where we speak about how such practitioners have been familiarized through their practice and through their meditation, have been familiarized to recognizing non-dual wisdom display as this substanceless magic display. So Rinpoche says, if we grasp at substance with attachment, it is because with our gross element deluded mind, we have created the ordinary 5 senses and the objects of the senses, because we never recognize that our senses and their objects are the illusory manifestation of our obstructed gross elements. We try to reject unpleasant objects and accept pleasant objects. Because of this, positives become negative and there is still suffering. So that's where we, on the basis of our duality, then gravitate towards particular objects on the basis of our senses. This comes from our innate confusion that constitutes then the self, which then engages with the world on the basis of this confused toxicity of the kleshas, that is attracted to some particular things and repulsed by other things. And it's on the basis of acting accordingly that we put down patterning, which we then refer to as karma. So in short, we can talk about, to understand what was being talked about here, is how this original ground is ignored, misunderstood, and that's what we call fundamental ignorance. The first of the 12 links of dependent arising, and the foundation also for what we call the skandha of form. So on the basis of that, then we construct self, and there's an experience of other. And all of that takes place within the first moment of ignorance. And then we have then the skandha of feeling, etc., the various developments of the 12 links of dependent arising, which essentially are informed by this toxic condition of the kleshas on the basis of self and the perceived objects. There's like and dislike, attraction and repulsion. And that's where we engage with the various pleasant objects and unpleasant objects in terms of attraction and rejection. And then that pattern, which then defines our person, is then what we think of as karma. And that's what constructs us as individuals with our particular dispositions. So on the basis of fundamental ignorance that constructs the self, then we have then these 2 elements that really drive our experience within samsara, which is then kleshas and karma. So we then create these realms, these experiences in which we solidify the external perceived as a realm and perceive the inner perceiver as person, and within that we then have our particular dispositions fueled then by karma and kleshas. So we have these experiences of the various realms where we essentially create then the experience on the basis of our karma. So we create our realms of experience through our disposition and the karmic patterns that these dispositions, these deluded dispositions create. What applies universally is that we have ignorance, the moment of unconsciousness, from which we construe awareness as a self that perceives the space of awareness as other. So this ground quality that is not deluded, when it's misconstrued on the basis of ignorance, then there's the solidifying of the self and the space in which it finds itself. So that's where this then perceives the other, self and other. For other references outside of Trinley Norbu Rinpoche's own teachings, there's a chapter within Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism that's called The Development of Ego that beautifully explains this in terms of how when we dance, if there's no self-consciousness, then there's just a unity with the space around us. And the moment that we all of a sudden think, I am dancing beautifully, then all of a sudden we think I and the space, and then the dance becomes clunky and self-conscious. And Trungpa Rinpoche makes that an example, a very intuitive example about how this experience of ignorance takes place and how we construct self and other. So this is where we then have aversion and attachment. This generates the kleshas, and once we act on the basis of the kleshas, we create solid patterns, which informs and drives our future experiences and our attitudes, choices of action. So this is how we are created in terms of our impulses, mental factors, and so on. So that's then what becomes the seeds for our future experiences, and that's how we cycle within samsara. So again, we have ignorance on the basis of which then we construct self and other, and it's on the basis of that then we have attachment and aversion. And this really is the foundation for the three poisons, the basic ignorance together with anger and desire. And this then leads to all the other branch kleshas that when we act on them, and in terms of body, speech, and mind, they become part of us. And that's where we then have karma that is embedded on our ground consciousness as what we call vasanas, and these then are the nature of karma action. So that's where continually within samsara we are conditioned by these causes and conditions that we lay down in terms of our own experience. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, I can understand why Lord Buddha left his jeweled kingdom. I can understand why Lord Buddha put his brocade robes aside. I can understand why Lord Buddha clad himself in ragged cotton. He did this to lead ordinary beings from these three passions which stem from ego, the source of all suffering. He did this to attain enlightenment, which is an egoless state beyond suffering. So, in terms of us then beginning to see through this, beginning to understand the subtleties, the subtle aspects that are intangible beyond what is apparent, this of course we do in all across the board in all of Buddhism, which is seeing through the solidity of appearances. And that is the prajna that then investigates, analyzes, and basically just sees, looks and sees the nature of reality. So there's continually this element of prajna that is not deceived by appearances. And we have this, and Trinley Norbu Rinpoche gives a very intuitive example of how we can see outer signals, such as a smile, the upturned lip, how that can indicate subtle element behind that. So we actually cannot feel what someone else is feeling, but we can again read their body language, their facial expression, etc. So that's where the intelligent person, and that goes beyond this, then those who have deep insight, they can read the signs of dependent arising and what we could call the auspicious coincidence, and they're able to see what is happening. Just basically being, you could say, in tune with reality. There's an awareness of what are the various signals that's happening around us. Thinley Norbu Rinpoche was famously very good at this and very intuitive, or rather very knowledgeable about reading signs. So I remember one of my friends, Anilotu Pamo, telling me how Rinpoche, if he was about to leave on a journey, if he walked outside and there was an empty container, then he would take that as not such a good sign. And in general, Rinpoche was very particular with making sure that everything really was very, very much, as Padmasambhava was saying, although my view is higher than the sky, my action with regards to cause and effect is finer than barley flour. And particularly surrounding then all the aspects of practice, Rinpoche would place tremendous attention to detail, making sure everything was very clean. You should ask Rinpoche's close students to describe this. So because of the invisible nature of relying on the subtle elements, people subscribing to confined materialist science consider Dharma practice superstition. So that's, of course, the sort of situation we have nowadays, where persons who look at spiritual practice, they don't really see how that would have any effect, being simply oblivious to what really matters in terms of our subjective experience. And in general, then with wisdom, prajna, then we see through this external and gross substance, and we begin to then be appreciative of the intangible that's behind, that actually is the real ground, the real power behind the appearances. So with their elements becoming increasingly light, practitioners will be beyond gross substance, which is enlightenment. So that's where, being in tune with their wisdom nature, then practitioners connect with enlightenment as it already permeates the appearances, permeates the elements. So that's where, particularly then speaking about Vajrayana, then all the aspects in terms of our body, in terms of our speech, in terms of our mind, is understood in terms of how they innately possess purity. And that's why through the already existing purity within the aspects of gross body, speech, and mind, then working with the path that connects with this purity, the practices, what we call Nadi, Prana, and Bindu, they then enable us to connect with the spontaneously present qualities of Vajra body, Vajra speech, and Vajra mind. So that's where our entire being is experienced in terms of body, speech, and mind. And yet that body, speech, and mind, while it's presently experienced as karmically constructed in terms of our particular body, our particular speech, our particular mind, and understood in terms of the confused karma that directs the ordinary gross body, speech, and mind, yet innately, body, speech, and mind never moves from its original purity. And so on the basis of the skillful means of the path, working with Nadi, working with Prana, working with Bindu, we uncover this innate actual reality that was always there, Vajra body, Vajra speech, and Vajra mind. So through purifying the path that purifies the gross inner and outer elements, our experience of our physical body, and also the confusion that is the basis for that, then the elements, they become lighter, and the distinction between outer and elements dissolve into substanceless essence. So this is what Rinpoche describes very beautifully, that through the practice in which we engage, for example, in terms of the 4 empowerments of Vajrayana, initially understanding through the first empowerment the nature of our reality, using the development stage to understand the actual nature of reality, and then gradually through the completion stage practices, aligning ourselves with this through the practices of the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th empowerment, then this duality and its subtle aspects is refined and eliminated. And so then with that, we encounter the Buddha nature, the abiding reality, which is then the wisdom of Samantabhadra. So Thinley Norbu Rinpoche says, good practitioners can diminish the dualism of their inner subject-substance mind and outer object-substance phenomena. When they do this, the subtle elements become more and more vast, more and more limitless, as they become boundless and profound. The distinction between the dualistic conception of outer and inner space elements diminishes until they have become purified into the same infinite expanse. Then everything is without beginning and without end. This is Samantabhadra, whose wisdom heart is the source of measureless and limitless knowledge, unconquered and undeceived by the illusion of dualism. So what we uncover on the basis of the path is the innate truth, the innate reality, the innate uncorrupted, undeceived, and non-dual reality that has always been. And yet, on the basis of us falling into duality, then constructing time and space and the solidification of the elements, then we need to engage in the path that diminishes this confusion. But that leads us then to the wisdom of Samantabhadra, in which then the original quality of non-confusion abides. Okay. Someone's asking, how does Dujum Tessa and Longchen Yingtig relate to each other? Well, they all come from Padmasambhava. Longchen Yingtig is really a confluence of the Nyingtig traditions, the heart essence traditions that came from Vimalamitra and Padmasambhava. Dujum Tessa is an interesting confluence on the teachings, of course, particularly from Padmasambhava, but also so much of the teachings that we have from Dujum Rinpoche came from his visionary experiences, meeting many great masters such as Saraha and such as Hunkara and yes, many great masters of the past, as well as Sambhogakaya Buddhas. So we should read the life of Dujum Rinpoche is absolutely extraordinary. Complement, different from complement, is a thing that completes or brings to perfection. Is this the sense it has in the opening poem and fits in with the idea of wisdom? Yeah, I understand what you mean. Yes. No, it is a compliment in the sense of there's an acknowledgement. And this is also where you could say the path of bhakti, devotion, enables us to profoundly, not just in terms of sort of intellectual appreciation of the five elements, but really a deep, passionate engagement with the beauty of the five elements as the five mothers enables us to eliminate the duality between us and the perceived space and its five qualities of the five elements. What is Nadi, Prana, and Bindu? That has to do with our body, and it has to do with the energy, and it has to do with really the essence of our body and consciousness. So this is sometimes, like prana is sometimes referred to as chi, and Nadi has more to do with the meridians, and Bindu really has more than to do with the essence of our body and consciousness. Can you briefly explain the difference between a root and contributing circumstances? Assuming it's something from Abhidharma. Yeah, it's more than Abhidharma, it's something everywhere. And it's really very important for us to understand this, because that's what the understanding of karma in the Buddhist context is, not just the one-shot deal where you say, you do this and then that happens. Yes, you have an apple seed and it will become an apple tree. But how it becomes an apple tree is due to the contributing circumstances of sunlight, soil, etc. So the seed could actually just remain there endlessly. But when there's contributing circumstances, such as then the soil and the moisture and the sun, etc., then you have the result. And then if you have great soil and great moisture and so on, then of course you have a great apple tree. Lack of such, then you might have sort of a slightly crooked apple tree. So really, we never really know when we say, particularly we talk about karmic result, we can kind of understand that a particular action has a particular potential, but how that potential actually plays out is due to the to the secondary or contributing circumstances. May I know what's the difference between Samaya Tara and Tara? Both are green. Well, actually, Samaya Tara can be various colors, but yeah, it's different. It's like, you know, two people can both be called you know, Francis. So that's where this in this context, there's not really any. We would say Tara, as we understand green and white Tara, we say originated from the tears of Chenrezi, Avalokiteshvara, and Samaya Tara is the consort then of Amoghasiddhi. So so it's the same name, but the understanding is a little bit different. But I can understand this can be confusing. Why the five wisdom always describes as feminine, such as the Kini sisters or mothers? Thank you. Really, because this is the intangible womb of all phenomena, and we associate the male more with manifestation, appearance, and the actual ground, the womb or the space, more with the feminine. And it's really on the basis of misconstruing the appearances as solid that we fail to see the emptiness nature of all reality. And so we would say, on the basis of wisdom, we really begin to understand the nature of all phenomena. So it's really through connecting with this intangible wisdom quality that we see the nature of reality. So we really refer to the this intangible wisdom quality as the mother of all the Buddhas, in terms of the wisdom that sees this nature. And then also we again and again refer to the way in which the Dakinis operate in terms of you could say a bit like the force that assists those that remain that keep pure samaya, those that abide by the inside of wisdom. They're also assisted from the outer world. So there is a sense that the yogis that abide with pure yogic discipline are assisted by you can say, the force of the elements, and the phenomenal world assists the yogi. So we would say the dakinis are the root of activity. So so essentially we could say this emptiness nature is associated with this realization that dissolves confusion, is associated with the feminine, with wisdom. And you can say all the aspects of manifestation that then become, you can say, that are manifested, then associated with the Buddhas, the male Buddhas. Can you please elaborate a bit on, we try to reject unpleasant objects and accept pleasant objects, but because of this, positive becomes negative and there is still suffering? Yes, because the innate nature of our reality is positive, but it becomes negative when it's not seen for what it is. And our censorship, our imposing like and dislike on the basis of our duality, basis of not seeing reality properly, on our lack of prajna, lack of vipassana, lack of wisdom, it continually operates within this tension between self and other. And I like this, I don't like that. And this solidifies this vicious cycle of me and what I like and don't like. And so I'm continually pleased and not pleased, and so on. And that's where continually we solidify further our sense of self and solidify further our perception of other, except we're not really perceiving the other properly. We're not really seeing the actual nature of reality. We're having a very censored, half-hearted approach to reality, because it's just being seen through the filter of what I feel is pleasant and what I feel is unpleasant. So that's where we need wisdom. Then what should be the right attitude? Not choosing at all? Yes. Well, it's not as exactly like just going with the flow, but it's actually just seeing things clearly. Of course, sometimes we need to make discerning decisions about what's helpful and what's not helpful. So that's where we need to be discerning. But the thing is, when we have likes and dislikes, we're not necessarily seeing phenomena for what they are. We're entirely seeing it from a very small place of just our self-centered vantage point. Okay. Are the 5 elements also labels, conceptions, that in nature they are the same, non-dual? Yes, I mean the 5 elements as they play out in their ultimate nature, the primordial mother Samantabhadri is simply just the expanse, but within that expanse there is then the appearances of the elements, which are then earth, water, fire, etc. So they're all the nature of great emptiness, and yet these are the aspects of great emptiness. So in the samsara condition, these are then experienced in terms of the dualistic objects, and in the, you could say, liberated aspects, this is the natural radiance in terms of the 5 lights, the 5 colors, the 5 mothers. Yeah. Okay. I think we're going to do something here. I think it would be a bit much at this point to start the next chapter, personal and general phenomena, because it's also quite some important matters there. So I'll try to figure out how to do it, but I think it's just we're sort of been sitting here for an hour and 20 minutes, and I'm just thinking that I could push on, but it wouldn't be fair to you guys. And so I'm thinking to just stop here. I would have liked to gone through this, but you know, there's a lot to be said about what we've just said. In fact, there's also a lot to be said about the next. So look, what could happen is maybe we might do an extra week on this topic or so on. I guess you don't mind. And I think in the long run, I think we're more interested in properly sort of studying this than rushing through it. So I think we'll just actually, we'll just leave it at that for today. Yeah, an extra week would be great. Okay, good. Yeah, I'm glad because yes, we don't want to rush this, and I think we've already covered some important bases here today. So please read then. Let's see here. I have to scroll through this. See, there's quite a bit left. So for the next time, then read this one, and just read a few chapters more if you can. Let's see how far we get. A little bit uncertain. Yeah. So yeah, read this one and also, you know, see how far you can get. Be good if you could read all of these, but let's see how far I can get next time. All right. This is a photo recently I found a friend of mine had taken in Bodna. This would have been 1970, 77, 78, 79. This was a young Australian woman who was traveling in Nepal at that time. I thought very beautiful picture. By this merit, may all attain omniscience, may it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may all beings be freed. May bodhicitta, precious and sublime, arise where it has not yet come to be, and where it has arisen, may it never fail, but grow and flourish ever more and more. Ever absorbed in the display of divine forms and primordial awareness, appearance, sound, and perception in the state of divinities, mantras, and dharmakaya. May I, inseparable from the practice of the profound and sequent great yoga, attain within the essence of mind the state of one taste. So these dedication prayers, this first one here comes from the Jataka tales, stories of the Buddha's previous lives. This one here, I'm not sure where it comes from, but it's one that we very often in Paltry Rinpoche's tradition associated with all the sort of summarizing the entire scope of the way of the Bodhisattva, the Bodhicharyavatara. And this last line, this comes from the great master of the Minderling tradition, Tadak Lingpa, Gyurma Dorje. These were the last words he uttered before he then passed away. So it's a chant that we very often chant at the end of practice, and also we often chant it before breaks. So just remind us of the yoga that we're continually sustaining in the Vajrayana. Okay. Yeah, I hope this is clarifying. Many people have, this is like I started off saying, we read Thinley Norbu Rinpoche's writings, right? This exquisite English, um, which is very much also coming from Rinpoche's incredible elegance and joy of interacting with phenomena, in which he takes the English language into into a new place. And sometimes when you read Rinpoche's writings, it's very much like the way he would speak, very intense and very much there's some very important points to be made about everything. Rinpoche had such a beautiful way of speaking, very clear, very sometimes very emphatic, very relaxed, and yet incredibly meaningful. So reading this is a joy. It's one of just reading it, even if sometimes some of the meaning sort of you could say is a bit over us, passes us by. Uh, it lays down such a seed for great meaning, and particularly for us who aspire to the Vajrayana path. This really reads as a tantra and sort of blesses our mind and informs our mind really to understand the nature of the Vajrayana. And also, even if we don't understand everything, there's always something that sticks. And then second reading, there's some new things that open up. And in this way, combining study and practice is so helpful. So I'm probably stating the obvious. You already know this. Okay. There's someone making an aspiration that may the speech of Thinley Norbu Rinpoche may always resound far and wide. Yeah. Some of it goes over our head, but I think it goes into our heart. I think that, yes, sometimes it might go over our head. And, of course, what I'm doing here is a little bit bringing it into the realm of our head in terms of clarifying it. And hopefully it's always good to have sort of a meeting of the two, because the head can very often, you could say, inform us. When the heart sort of, the heart is fickle. And sometimes we need hard logic, or 2 + 2 is always 4, regardless of your mood. So when there is a sort of, you could say, a clear understanding, a very sort of Vajra clear understanding, it enables us to bypass all the fluctuations that might happen in terms of our having, what Songtse Khyentse Rinpoche speaks about as inspiration disease. Sometimes we're very inspired, but sometimes we're not. But if there is this clear understanding, then that helps a lot. But at the same time, also that clear understanding, the more it penetrates us, the place it touches us is really the heart. And sometimes just on the basis of faith, it touches our heart and opens up for a dimension that's very real and not ruled by confusion. So that's where we can talk about blessing. And with our open heart, reading something like this, it can enable this very real dimension of blessing to penetrate. Okay, somebody asked, Songtse Rinpoche once said that when things go wrong, you may cope with it, or you may not cope with it. How do we decide to cope or not cope? Well, it's not really a decision, you know. We can be successful at it, or we can be unsuccessful. So that's where we might be able to handle it, or we might not. But we definitely have to sooner or later relate with certainty the issues we're talking about here, which is the condition of samsara. We have an illness; it's curable, but we definitely have to now proceed with it. We might presently not be that skillful in dealing with our illness, but we're going to have to work with it. That's choiceless. And that's where we have the path. So on the moment that we take refuge in the Buddha as the seer, the one who has seen truth, the one who understands our illness and also knows what it takes to go beyond, then a moment from the moment we take refuge, then we're on the path. Then we apply his medicine, the Dharma, and we travel the path together with the fellow Sangha. So that's where we have decided. The moment we take refuge, we have decided to cope. Yeah, we're on the path of coping. Okay, thank you very much, and shall see you again. These are more Nundo questions. Why is bodhicitta the nature of Nadi Prana Bindu? Because innately, our being is innately pervaded by the awakened nature. So our body, even though it is constructed in terms of our karmic disposition, our karmic projections, innately, body, speech, and mind has never moved from the actual reality of the pure aspect of bodhicitta. And that's where we talk about the subtle body in terms of the way that we work with the yoga of Nadi, Prana, and Bindu. Okay. Thank you.